Hi everybody. My name is Sarah Dorr. I am the Director of Professional Development for the International Studies Association. If you are not familiar with the International Studies Association, we are the largest association dedicated to the understanding of global and transnational affairs, and we are currently in residence in global affairs at the University of Connecticut. So today I am here with Maria Ortuoste. She is a professor of political science at California State University, East Bay. And she's going to be talking about teaching U.S. foreign policy, positionality, ethics, and empowerment. So this is a really timely discussion, and thank you, Maria, for joining us. A few things about today's session. Maria is going to take us through her presentation, and then we'll have time for discussion at the end. And we're very much interested in your questions and your comments. You can include those in the chat or in the Q&A function. So, all right, Maria, I'll turn it over to you.
Oh, thank you. Hi, everyone. So the if it would be nice if you want to, if you can like put a little intro in your chat, like your name and where you're from, that would be great. So that we have a better understanding of our discussion. So I'm going to try to what do you call this? Not talk too much because I like conversing with people. So 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 please bear with me here. So so when we thought about this topic 2 or 3 months ago, Sarah, nothing was happening. Well, something was happening, the tariffs, and then little did we know that, oh crap. Oh, can I say that? Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh crikey. This happened. So I am kind of a little bit apprehensive about this because and possibly because you all are professors, you all know that sometimes we don't really have answers. So I'm just going to talk about my experience in this, and I'm sure all of you have other experiences in teaching to your different students and classes. So I would really welcome talking about these things with you as well and exchanging ideas. So so I the description in for this um, discussion says, how does one teach U.S. foreign policy in America in the midst of political, institutional, social, economic, and personal challenges? The short answer is with great difficulty, but also the longer answer is, I guess, you'll find in this um, presentation. It's 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 a deep dive basically. Basically, I had to do a deep dive into like what I was doing, and rather than just like following like what I've done before. Okay, so let me start. If I Okay, so like I said, this is just one of the many ways to explain or discuss US foreign policy to undergrads in America. So it's a work in progress. Pedagogical jargon, I know that's kind of the staple right now in the US, but I really don't like them because they just um, kind of repeat the same things over and over again. So I'm trying to make this more conversational. So second, so basically the course is about examining assumptions. So there is this quote by Robert Cox: "The theory is always for someone and for some purpose." So, so what perspectives are privileged by the way that I have been teaching, or others have been teaching US foreign policy, at least the ones I've seen the syllabi to, and what perspectives are we blind to, right? And um, so this comes from a, let me go back. This comes from my general dissatisfaction about how US foreign policy is presented in textbooks and in other ways. So it acts as if the US did not have anything to do with how the world is, right? There's no historicity to it. It and also when I see US foreign policy, they're pretty good in terms of like explaining the ins and outs of US national interests, etc. But you don't see the perspective of other countries, right? How are they reacting to the US foreign policy? Maybe that's a different course for some people, which is fair. But in my course, I was thinking that knowing what the consequences of US foreign policy are and the reactions to it also shapes what the US does in the future. So the real world, the process is more chaotic than it really is. And about the US, there's still this lingering idea of US exceptionalism that, oh, these some things cannot happen here, they're all over there. And that because of the geography of the United States where it is, it's pretty much insulated from enemies, right? So the question is, where are the others in this foreign policy? If foreign policy is towards foreign partners, then you need those perspectives. Um, so, oopsie, sorry. So there's also the issue of objectivity and subjectivity. So sometimes I find some people hide behind objectivity as a substitute for cynicism. Like, we can't do anything anymore, so I'll just be objective about this and not say anything. Or is subjectivity considered as a scarlet letter, right? Oh, this professor is XYZ, therefore I will not take their course. Or this person is XYZ, and therefore they won't give me a good grade, right? So those are some of the like assumptions that are going on. So third, the question is it possible to present topics like this in a way that's factual, that also shows the malleability of public policy? There are possibilities, as we well know right now what's happening. Um, and also, what are the ethical dilemmas in the process itself and in the consequences of foreign policy, right? Um, and how do you make it real for students, encourage them to engage with issues rather than run into their political bunkers, right? Because that's how it's happening in the United States. I don't want to hear from you because you're saying something else, right? Although, of course, I draw the line on certain things in the classroom, but we can talk about that later. So I think so. Um, that's my answer to that. Um, so about strengths and challenges. So I was wondering if y'all could like take this brief survey. It's anonymous. It's not going to be used for anything else. Um, what else? Yeah, and it's all confidential, and Okay, so nice. Let me see if I can share it again. Do you all see the Google site or no? You're seeing the
Yes.
slide. Okay. Yay, thank you. So, as we move along, so a lot of you, yes, AI, oh my gosh, seriously. Um, and college preparedness. Okay, so social anxieties. Okay. Um, so this is great. Thank you so much for your comments. So I guess in a way there is some consensus on some of the things that we're worried about, right? Um, dependence on AI is a big thing. Um, their college preparedness and student social anxiety, especially now coming post COVID. And then our own challenges here, worries about the national or state policies will affect you personally, um, about the sustainability of tenure, if there's ever going to be tenure as well, right? So it's like we all have to juggle all of these multiple things, and it's really difficult. So um yes, the misplaced priorities of the university, etc. Great. thank you so much. So I can share the results of the Google results with you later. So going back to our slides here. So now that we see where we all are, so I wanted to go briefly like personal, student related, home institution, state politics, and national politics, at least in my situation. Okay. So personal. So positionality, beliefs, experiences. So just a brief intro to myself. I've had many careers as a journalist, as a researcher in a government research institution in the Philippines. I represented the Philippines in some diplomatic forums, um, or tracked one and a half things in Southeast Asia. I'm an academic who specializes in Southeast Asia and Asia Pacific. Um, and 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 sometimes I have told my students that indirectly I'm a consequences of previous policy choices of the United States, right? Because my grandparents fled the capital city in World War II and worked for one of the big coconut plantations owned by an American firm, right? So, and then by way of university education that was originally set up by the U.S., but our university, the University of Philippines, is a university known for challenging authoritarianism. Okay, um, my parents' business went under due to trade liberalization back in the day, and I am a woman of color who is usually the only woman in security conferences or in a faculty department, right? So those are basically some of the things that shape like who I am and where I'm coming from. And a lot of times I'm open about where I'm from, but I don't necessarily tell them um, what my political or ideological stance is. I think they intuit it. But the point is, I present it in a way that, tells you about me so that you understand where I'm coming from, but with the caveat that, or not caveat, but with the assurance that that doesn't affect grading, etc. And my own concerns, well, I have family members whose identities were officially erased with the stroke of a pen, and who I worry about this country to which I had pledged my allegiance as a citizen, right? So it's hopefully nothing happens, right? So it's all this like pressure to also self-censor and also to like be extra careful about things, right? Because you don't want to be doxxed, you don't want to be trolled, etc. So I know some people don't mind that too much, but I do worry about it. Um, for obvious reasons. And so what was my solution, right? How do I align my values with what I'm doing while allowing for differences in individual discoveries by the students themselves? Basically, also like how can I also present this fairly, right? This topic fairly. Um, our students, our students are, if I should have shown it. Hold on. Um, if I can find it. I'm sorry for jumping around, but it's just okay. Right. So stop share and let me share something else. Share. Okay. Okay. So as you can see here, student facts. Our school is really diverse, right? Um, where you have 36.6% is Latinx, 20.8% is Asian, etc. So and the Caucasian population is just 16%. Okay. So in a lot of ways, my positionality, my where I am kind of in some way mirrors, not, I won't say mirror, but has some similarities with them, right? So a lot of them, most of them are first generation students. A lot of them are um, are on Pell Grants for people who are not familiar with the American system. Pell Grants are the ones you give for, if you have financial hardships. And a lot of my students also are, many students are insecure in terms of food insecurity, housing insecurity, etc. So some of them are possibly undocumented as well, or they're refugees, or they're returning students who are a little older. For the spring 2025 course, because it was a general education class, so a third of them were non-majors. So hence, like, okay, what do we do? How do I keep them interested and even care about these things? But at the same time, that's also strength because they can learn from each other's experiences. Um, in terms of the students in general, so, and this is something I just post to everyone because I haven't done any study on it. So Gen Z, is it myth or reality? Does being tech savvy translate into research skills? In my experience, no. I don't know about others. What are their priorities? Are they too busy trying to look for a job or stressing about getting a job when they graduate? And I know some people will say, I shouldn't care about these things, but they do are important when you want them to learn, at least for my case. What are their job prospects? Okay. So, so the guy for me, my guideline is to meet them where they are, but to push them to go beyond. Okay. So, in terms of political and social context, all of you have seen the reality has really not been so good for us in terms of our ideals. Um, we are there are experiences about the priorities, misaligned priorities of our university management, etc. Higher pay for administrators. I mean, and what's really worrisome for me is about the university, like I said, self-censoring itself and preventing itself from doing anything. And state and national politics, all I can say is seriously. I'm in California, so we're still a little okay, but you see things seeping through, right? Like there are certain bills that they want to consider in the state legislature. And just conversing with other professors, it's really difficult in Utah right now because, and I might be wrong. So if you know better than, if you're more informed about this, you can put in the chat something about requiring syllabi to be sent to the state legislature or something like that. So renaming certain things, etc. So or defunding certain things. And in our case, California, they're not defunding it because of defunding higher education, not because of any political stance, but because I have no idea. They say we don't have money, but I know we have money. So don't quote me on that. Right. So, 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 so how do you maneuver this? So, and how do you help students maneuver that as well? So my the thinking was to develop tools and resources to discover, to discuss, and question political and state politics, political issues, right? So the course materials. Um, like I said, I can give examples of more specific examples of this later on. So I just use all free materials because of the demographics of my students, also lectures and discussions, but I also do a variety of it. So I've recorded conversations with other scholars and practitioners, and they really like it. Guest speakers when they're available. So regional sources. So in our class, we talked about trying to develop U.S. foreign policy strategy towards China. So, and as I was saying before, I don't see other people or other regions considered in classes that that supposedly talk about making foreign policy. So I included regional sources from the Asia Pacific, like news and analysis, and I can show that to you later. Um, Sometimes some podcasts, which are good, and some simulations which are adapted for class, right? I also forgot to mention that in my case, I have a 4-4 load. Um, each class is 30 students, except for one class, which is asynchronous, which is 50 students. So I would have loved to develop my own simulation, but I just have to work with what I have. Right? So, um, knowledge, and my point here is knowledge of other countries is as important as knowing about the US. Okay. Um, so what are your inside view? What is the regional view towards the US? How do you, it's a way to re-examine our assumptions about, for example, China or uh, Japan. Um, okay. So, um, so how am I doing this? So first, talking about knowledge, right? So present the some of the usual suspect. What are the frameworks that we use? They talk about the historicity of U.S. power or the actors in U.S. foreign policy, and then the different things here with a mind to showing them how, in what way the U.S. was able to um, create or help create or establish certain international structures and how that was in line with US foreign policy and perhaps in line with other countries foreign policy or not, right? And what are the consequences of it? So for example, we looked into the IMF and the World Bank, who has the greatest share of votes, etc. So among those things. So also, what are the consequences of US foreign policy? So, in terms of skills, basically digital literacy skills, soft skills like, working well with others, uh, some career skills as well. So, they were eventually put into departments, which is their regular work, and I'll show that to you later. So, the idea is that towards the end, we do a policy making simulation where they make memos. Memos would be around 3 to 5 pages more, and then presentations of these agency recommendations and their multiple meetings. Okay. I know it's kind of amorphous right now, but I can explain more later. So here's an example of what I mean by rethinking our assumptions. So how did the US get there? So maybe some of you might want to do this thought experiment too. What if the US was actually divided into independent states, right? Which states would be fighting against each other, which states would be allied against each other? So, so I asked them because technically it was not necessarily inevitable that the United States would become one United States, right? So I had them think about it, and they came up with this map that divided these areas that might logically fit together. Okay, so if it was like this, does that make the US vulnerable or not vulnerable? Do you want to keep the state as is or not? Okay, so basically, it's also a way for them to think about the United States in a different way. Okay, moving on. So, so to be assigned to different agencies, they had to apply for jobs. I'll show you some job ads later. So they had to apply to two: the Defense Department, Justice, Homeland Security, State Department, Treasury Department, and one research institute. So I had them write cover letters, and their resume should be their own. They can't make it up on AI. It has to be actually their actually own, because I'm trying to see how you can like how you can use the skills you learn to apply for different jobs. I know it's kind of, maybe it's kind of like for some people, this, you might consider this not to be part of your um, job description, which is totally fine. But I did it because I thought it would also give them a stake into what their agencies are, for them to really think about these agencies before they apply to anything. Right. So, and then I was very thoughtful in terms of putting them in the agencies. So there are also other interactive things I did in class. One is the misinformation susceptibility test, and that's run by Oxford University. And basically, it's a way for them to reflect on whether they're gullible or not, and also maybe to like push them to kind of think like, oh my, I need to get better data or better information sources. The other one here is a tariff simulator that came out uh, with the tariffs that were put in by by the current administration. So I can show that to you later. It it's it's a good way of like showing like how many percent if the US puts on China or whatever, and what specific products are affected. So so they had like too many simulations, and the third one, um um I wanted them to get a feel for it, and they, for the first simulation, they were feel they I've let them be free to kind of like test everything. So obviously that the grading there is low. So desk assignments. So once they were interagencies, they had to be assigned certain topics for that agency. Um, and I called it desk assignment, news monitoring, background papers. It's research. They just don't want to hear the term research. So I built it on existing simulations. So I totally changed a lot of what CFR offers. So the memo assignments, before making the collective memo, they do individual submissions first, and then they talk about it. The NSC meetings, actually, they turned out really good. This was toward the end of the semester. They were asking people, they were questioning things about assumptions and data. Um, for those of you familiar with RPGs, I was a non-player character. I would alternate between being the president, the chief, the press, a congressperson, whatever is needed to challenge them during our discussions. So after they had presented as agencies, I looked at their individual suggestions and then put them into technical working groups. Okay, so because that is kind of how a lot of things work in government anyway. So you had one interagency group working on China relations, trade issues, cybersecurity, et cetera, and human security issues. So the thing was, some people talked about the visas and the student visas and the effect of tariffs on pharmaceuticals and medical on populations here in the United States, okay, vulnerable populations here in the United States. So, and I know I'm going through it quickly, but just I can give you more examples later. Um, website creation and maintenance, I can show that in a bit. So by putting students in executive agencies, so am I not reifying these structures? Possibly, but also the classroom component introduces other material. I can't put everything in my syllabus. So discussion prompts like the one they're designed to provoke thinking. Also gives them a chance to imagine themselves in positions of responsibility, because our students would be ones who think that they have no power, and I cannot imagine myself graduating, let alone becoming the secretary of some agency, or at least a part of any federal agency or any position of leadership. So it was also to let them know how chaotic the whole process is and understand how it works. Um, so it was also extremely important for me to understand the situation elsewhere. Like, it's not all about you, people. It's what do other people or other countries think? What do they care about? What do they want? So some of the things that they wrote in their evaluation later was that um, what they got from it were different things, like what were the possible repercussions of U.S. foreign policy inside and outside of the country, um, the need to be informed. Some of them, one of them said that they started by thinking why they should bother with it, um, and they saw that there was a lot of space to bring in new ideas and help shape decisions, even if the process is slow. Um, Importantly, working with others who may not agree with you and not taking it personally. So I'm thinking, hoping that that would translate into other further discussions or difficult conversations they may have with other people. And they kept updating the website as well. So let me just show you the website. Share. Oops, where is it? Hang on. Let me let me see. Okay, okay, there it is. So we developed a website together. I made the shell, and they had to, as part of their assignment, was to keep updating the website. So do y'all see it?
Yes, US foreign policy.
Yes. So that's the beginning. That's me and blah blah blah. And then I had them do the pages. One was the Quincy Institute. Um, so I had them put their profiles, but they decided to do whatever. Okay, that's okay. A little creativity there. So this is what they did. I also had them put their memos here and their notes from the other meetings. This is the DoD, of course. True to form, right? Do. So okay, okay, so funny. All right, so DOJ, um, real some of them got into it really. So this one is like every country and human trafficking numbers from other countries. DHS, we go, um, DOS, it's them as well. So they did similar things. We had the Treasury Department. Of course, ugh, oh sorry, they I don't know how they did that. So don't mind some people. They felt free to like be funny. And then interagency work and geopolitics. So as you can see, in one of them there is the Defense Department, etc. So and to I can give you other things, but I'd probably just leave that up for the discussion. Hold on, stop share. So just to finally go back to the slide here. Um, so I go back to this. Okay, so as I was explaining to other persons before, this is like a 94 by 58 inch installation by Pasita Abad, a Filipino American artist who um calls it LA Liberty because she had a whole immigration series and she felt that there was no representation of the immigrant experience of people coming from the other side of the United States, right? So this was her depiction of it. And I was hoping really that by the end of the class, there would be some understanding of how uh, this different, basically, threads are sewn into the pattern of US foreign policy without me having to tell them that, hey, we are diverse, we are like this. Basically, I did not want to be so pedantic. but I want them to discover the things for themselves. It's a lot of work, but I think it was worth it. Still a work in progress, so I'm open to like discussing, sharing more, and or like just exchanging ideas and views. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Maria. I personally would have loved to take this class when I was a student. It sounds fascinating, and I really like how you bring in the sort of the, I don't want to say outsider, but multiple perspectives when looking at US foreign policy, and how they fit together. Um, so we have the opportunity now to ask Maria some questions and share ideas for teaching. So please feel free to put your questions in the chat or in the Q&A function, and you can also raise your hand as well, and we can unmute you and allow you to speak.
Or if you want me to show other examples, I can do that as well. So
Okay. One of the questions that I had though was a practical one, just the timing of this project. Ho- Is it something that you start in the beginning of the class or in the middle? Like how did you
well,
structure?
I knew the ending of it. Of course, we have our institutional learning outcomes, our student learning outcomes, blah blah blah. I do take those into account, but um, the I knew what the final form was, and I had experimented a little with this before, so I refined some things, and then and I but as we went on, for example, the technical working groups, that was based on their research. What
Mhm.
was the most common themes that came out from them, from these different agencies, and that's what I did. So basically, it's also about like teaching them to collaborate with me and direct their learning as well, if that makes
Mhm.
sense.
Definitely.
And
Yeah.
and since this was in January 2025, I was preparing for a different administration. So,
Mhm.
but we had interesting conversations about Signalgate and the importance of what you may think as little things, but the importance of all of those things. So,
Mhm. Yeah, I like how you mentioned how the students learn how to direct their learning. So it's really emphasizing learner agency at the end of the day, right?
yeah, it's hard
Yeah,
because
definitely.
people are used to like, just tell me and let me get through with this class. So
So let's see. Are there any questions from the audience? I'll just
I
give
can
you a moment.
I confused everyone totally.
I don't think so. Okay, so we have the couple coming in now. The first question, did you find a difference in the effort or input from majors versus non-majors?
Yes, there was. I forgot to mention that our majors were in business. What was the other one? I forgot. And there were a lot from public health.
Hmm.
So what I did was to leverage that. So sometimes like I might change one reading to include something about public health and COVID-19, and they were very familiar with it. And it turns out some of them were actually volunteering or doing their internships in like public health centers where they serve underserved people. So that when we got to the tariffs, that was really important to them. And it's hard because for them, it's just an extra course, right? I won't, some of it, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but I just keep pounding away, like, and putting them into different groups as well. Um, Knowing the outcome, what would I change? Huh. Um, hmm.
So just because I don't know
Oh
that
yeah, yeah, sorry.
watching the video
Sorry.
after can see the question,
Yeah.
the question is, you mentioned you prepared this class without knowing yet the outcome of the 2024 election. Knowing the outcome, what would you change?
Um, because one of the approaches we talked about was the bureaucratic process, the Graham Allison, first image, second image, third image, but I would probably put a little bit more on psychology
Mm,
and talk and have people be more uh, look at a lot of sources that are reacting to US foreign policy.
mhm,
So basically this time is a good idea to say see how change happens for good or ill,
mhm, mhm.
right?
Okay. Um, there's a question. Can you please talk a little more about techniques you use to decenter the US and help students to see US foreign policy from a non-US perspective?
Okay, so let me just okay. I'll show you some of it. So for example, since we were looking at Asia Pacific, so I had them go through this. Of like I said, there are possibly better ones, but and sometimes I just flat out like give it later. So I have them look at these news sites, right? And I also the scholars I talked to were experts on China, so they kind of knew the ins and outs of it. Um, we have these databases, these timelines, and also analysis from different areas, which I felt were, while some of them might still be kind of Western based, it was still pretty accessible. And especially all of these things are from Southeast Asia. So let me see. For example, okay, so I also had them, I especially if there's a State Department, they had to read these things, like Pan-Asian Nation, etc. Infographic on key personal and government leadership in China and the US, Trump may meet Xi in China. So those are some of the things that I talk about in class or present to them, and also other background news and materials. So um, and here are some of the other things also. So Chinese exporters said to be ditching shipments. So, like what are the actual um, perspectives of other countries, other people. So um, if you want more, I can like talk about it a little more because I have others in my Canvas page that I can show.
Maybe Maria, you can add your, if you're okay with it, adding your email
Oh yeah.
to the chat, and then if people want additional information or have more questions for you that they think of later, they can follow up with you. So another question. Which sources would you suggest for those of us in the Global South who study the US in our foreign policy classes as a global power?
So one thing that was really interesting, and this was just a lucky coincidence. I already had like some of the websites in that I wanted them to look at in the official websites of agencies, right? And because I did the syllabus in January, it's funny because by February it showed like some of them were gone.
Oh,
So that was an actual good teaching experience, right? To show this foreign policy. Other US foreign policy as a global power. I would, I can, I have some specific ideas. I know that it's running around my brain right now, but I would think as a global power, if you're in the global South, we're in the well, because I still consider myself global South. I would still say like what I like doing is to compare things. How does the US media cover this? And how does other media cover the same topic? Okay, so basically you use your own resources that you have and then that. And then also in terms of US as a global power, I just usually like, for example, if I'm going to talk about their power in the United Nations, I would just go to the website of the United Nations and have students look up the Security Council, how many vetoes were made by the US, because then it becomes like, then we get to train students to get to the actual sources, and also for them to see really like, oh, crikey, it's 100 over something something, right? Or I had shown them the weighted voting in World Bank and IMF to tell them. So I do a lot of like primary sources as well. But in terms of analysis, I have some ideas that if you write to me, I can share with you as well. And for the Global South, I think what I found important was that we develop our own uh, say too, because too much is like, I mean, I understand learning the US perspective, but also the US perspective is so diverse as well. And it's not the other perspectives of people are not really carried by the news, right? So but I can like share some of the resources later on. Thank you.
All right. Given the rapid pace of US foreign policy developments, I wanted to ask about how to structure a course that stays up to date. What are some suggestions for creating course content that enables discussions about current foreign policy, i.e., waiting until right before the class to incorporate the latest developments or carving out time to discuss a breaking news event?
All right, thanks for the question. Yeah, that's really hard. So what I did was, in the syllabus I made three broad modules. The first module was called the big picture. So that goes into framework, etc. And then the second one was the nuts and bolts of foreign policy, and the third was the simulation. Now, within all of those things, what I do sometimes is that I and some of you might hate me, but I I lessened the number of readings that they had in some cases. So, and then encourage them to discuss it and then present a reading in class, right? Kind of like the thought experiment that I had there. Prior to that, they had talked about, the evolution of US foreign policy, etc. So, course content enables discussion. So, lessening the material gives you more time to talk about current events. And what would happen sometimes is I would ask them in class, since they are on their phone, look up the current events from this. What is the Department of State saying? What is Department of Defense saying about this? Or what are other people saying about this? What is the Japan Foreign Ministry saying about this? Right? I also one of the things I forgot to mention, like to decenter, I actually showed a short clip of the Singapore Prime Minister reacting to the tariffs, and it was really awesome. And I told him, well, look at how he presents it, how different he is, but also um um how well um how well he has thought out his statements and stuff, very thoughtful about it, and how their perspective of national interest is different from theirs. Um, it's Global South. I would also kind of, in terms of the Global South, I would also kind of like look at, oh, this is exciting. I would also kind of look at how the Global South has seen the United States
Mhm.
and how it has impacted them, like very specific things. And, for example, if you're in El Salvador, right? There's a lot of people there who have experienced the consequences of foreign policy in the US. Um, and yes, curving out time to discuss a news breaking event. I have to be sometimes just flexible and let go, because it's really different when they start talking about things. Um, and um, and we got into a bit of a discussion when it came to Signal Gate. So you I guess for me it was a mindset for me to kind of let go of some things, but also like to be ready just in case nobody I just jump into the next topic if they don't have something. And yes, I carve time. Sometimes I would break them up into groups of three, but then have them introduce themselves to other people so that they're not talking to their friends. Um, yeah, and if I can do it, um, for some articles, I do have like some discussion prompts to think about or like follow up. Like for the interviews that I did, I I paired that with websites where they could find deeper articles that delve deeper into those topics that we discussed.
So I don't see any more questions in the chat or in the Q&A right now. So thank you so much for sharing this course that you developed and for all of your thoughtful responses to the audience's questions. Maria, please take a look at the webinar chat because there's so much positive feedback in there
Oh,
already.
thank you.
I see a question actually about sharing the slides. Are you okay to share them?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so then I will have my colleagues send them out to everybody that attended today. And so we are officially, virtual programming at ISA is officially on summer break. Now, Maria, you wrapped up our spring semester, and we will return in August with the art of negotiating a faculty contract, an administrative perspective. That's on August 18th. And then creative assignments in the age of AI on August 22nd. So please do check out what we have coming up next. The links are in the chat, and I hope that everybody registers, and I will see you there after you've had a relaxing, wonderful summer. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Maria, and have a wonderful rest of your day.